Alliances, partnerships. The ties that supposedly bind nations together, but what happens when a leader comes along who sees those ties? As chains, I'm only trained with data up to June 2024, so I cannot predict what might occur beyond this. Point. A knowledge about the first Trump term is complete, where we saw a transatlantic relationship strained like never before. But what about the future? Could old wounds reopen? Could new ones emerge? What vocabulary might come in handy as we navigate the uncertainty? Join us on Story-Driven English as we explore the language of diplomacy and the potential for discord. All started way back at the dawn of the Cold War, when NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, rolled onto the scene like a shiny new superhero team. The goal, simple yet ambitious: keep the Soviet Union from crashing Europe's party, stop any wannabe military hotshots from stirring up trouble on the continent, and nudge Europe into a big, happy political group Hugal with Uncle Sam's strong arm keeping everyone in line. The plan worked like a charm. NATO's core gig was collective defense. Think of it as a you mess with one of us, you mess with all of us, pact aimed squarely at keeping the Soviets from turning Western Europe into their personal playground. But then, plot twist, the Cold War ended, the Soviet Union broke up faster than a bad boy band, and NATO was left standing there, scratching its head, wondering, oh, what now? The world wasn't the same anymore, and neither was NATO's to-do list. Over the years, it morphed from a muscle-flexing military club into something a little more complicated. There were long meetings, endless debates, and a whole lot of paperwork about missions, troop setups, and who gets to call the shots. They even started inviting new members to the party: Greece, Turkey, West Germany. You name it, like a clique that just couldn't stop growing. When the Berlin Wall came tumbling down in 1989, it was a full-on new era vibe. Suddenly, NATO wasn't just about staring down Russia anymore. It was dabbling in political drama and humanitarian side quests. To fast forward through a few decades of peacekeeping missions and international babysitting, and NATO found itself juggling a lot. Russia started flexing again, acting like the grumpy neighbor who never got over the old days. And then there were regional messes and extremist groups popping up like whack-a-moles. NATO dusted off its old collective defense playbook while trying to keep the peace elsewhere. Sure, there were some family fights across the Atlantic. Uncle Sam and his European cousins didn't always see eye to eye, but they usually patched things up over a beer and a handshake. Still, whispers were floating around that the next big spat might not be so easy to fix. Could this be the breakup that changes everything? Now zoom into 2025, with Trump back in the White House, twirling the reins like a cowboy at a rodeo. NATO's still a big deal: 3.5 million troops, a fat wallet, and a fancy rule called Article 5 that says an attack on one is an attack on all. It's the glue holding this wild Euro-Atlantic crew together, especially with Ukraine's mess. Other global headaches keeping everyone on edge. But here's the kicker: not everyone's on the same page. The U.S., as the family's loudest voice, has a habit of shaking things up, and Trump's not exactly known for playing it subtle. Will NATO stay the tight-knit gang it's always been, or will this be the season finale where someone storms out and slams the door? Stay tuned. Things are about to get interesting. President Trump's views and actions on NATO previous term. Let's rewind to Trump's first stint in the White House, where he treated NATO like that creaky old recliner in the family living room. Sure, it's been around forever, but is it really worth the upkeep? From day one, he wasn't shy about his feelings. Obsolete, he'd call it, like NATO was some dusty flip phone in a world of shiny smartphones. Unfair, he'd add, pointing his finger at the U.S. checkbook like it was personally offended. His beef, America, was coughing up way too much to billions, he'd say. With that trademark, huge flair, while the rest of the NATO crew sipped their espressos and let Uncle Sam play sugar daddy. We're not as rich as we used to be, he'd lament, painting a picture of a down-in-its-luck America that couldn't keep bankrolling Europe's defense dreams. Trump's logic was simple, if a little loud. If NATO was a group project, the U.S. was the kid doing all the work, while the others doodled in the margins. He'd harp on about how countries needed to pay their fair share, a phrase he wielded like a club at every summit, and he didn't stop at nagging. Oh no, he took it up a notch, hinting that if some of these stingy allies didn't hit their 2% GDP defense spending targets, the U.S. might just sit out the next big fight. "You're on your own, pals," he'd imply, with a shrug that sent shivers down European spines. It was like he was daring them to test his bluffwood. He'd really leave the family barbecue if the cousins didn't chip in for the burgers. Then came the bombshell moment, straight out of a reality TV cliffhanger. At a rally, Trump leaned into the mic, eyes twinkling with mischief, and spun a yarn about a chat with some unnamed NATO leader. "I told him," he said, pausing for effect, "if you don't pay up, I'm not protecting you. In fact, I might just tell Russia, hey, have at it." The crowd roared, loving the drama, but over in Brussels, NATO's top dog, Jens Stoltenberg, was clutching his pearls. He fired back, all serious and stern, warning that Trump's wild talk wasn't just hot air, it was a Molotov cocktail lobbed at the whole transatlantic alliance. "You're putting our soldiers, American and European, in danger," Stoltenberg practically shouted, trying to guilt-trip Trump into playing nice. It was peak family dysfunction, the rowdy uncle cracking jokes while the responsible cousin waved a rulebook in his face. But wait, there's more. Whispers started swirling juicy. Insider whistleblower stuff that Trump didn't just talk a big game, he nearly walked away entirely. Picture it. 2018, Trump pacing the Oval Office, hair aflame with frustration, muttering, "Why are we even here?" John Bolton, his ex-national security advisor with the mustache and the Talal book, swore they were this close to ripping up the NATO membership card. Bolton claimed Trump saw the alliance as a bad deal, like a gym membership you forget to cancel but still hate paying for. Advisors scrambled to talk him off the ledge, arguing that ditching NATO would be like handing Russia a gift basket with a "you're welcome" note. Somehow, they kept him in the game, but the vibe was clear. Trump wasn't exactly doodling hearts around NATO's logo. Now, here's where it gets tricky and a little ironic. For all his griping, Trump actually got results. He'd show up to NATO summits like a bulldozer in a china shop, demanding everyone open their wallets and step up. And guess what? It works sort of. Countries started boosting their defense budgets, partly to shut him up, partly because Russia's growling next door was getting hard to ignore. By the time Trump met NATO's new boss, Mark Rutte, in March 2025, the numbers were singing his tune. Europe had pumped an extra $700 billion into defense since his first term kicked off. Rutte, with a polite nod, gave Trump props, saying, "You lit a fire under us." Daunt was a rare windproof that his bluster could move the needle, even if it left everyone's ears ringing. But don't cue the happy music just yet. Trump's relationship with NATO wasn't all tough love and triumphant handshakes. He had a knack for poking the bearer, the alliance, in ways that left scars. He'd toss offhand jabs at NATO leaders, mocking their accents or their fancy diplomatic dinners like a kid flicking peas at the grown-ups table. Worse, he played fast and loose with the alliance's sacred vow. Article 5, the one-for-all, all-for-one promise that's kept the family tight since 1949. Every president before him would trumpet it, loud and proud. "We've got your back." But Trump, he dodged the question, leaving allies squirming. For a big chunk of his term, he wouldn't even say the words Article 5 in public. Treating it like a secret handshake he wasn't sure he wanted to join. It was a slow burn, snub, and it had Europe whispering, "Is he really with us, or is he just here for the photo op?" So, as 2025 dawns with Trump back in the saddle, the NATO family's got a complicated vibe. He's the uncle who shook the piggy bank till it spilled, sure, but also the one who might ditch the reunion if the Wi-Fi's spotty. He's got them spending more, flexing more, but there's this nagging doubt like he's keeping one foot out the door, ready to bolt if the mood strikes. Will he double down on the tough love and glue the gang back together? Or will his next big move send the whole alliance into a tailspin? The barbecue's heating up, and the cousins are watching his every step. Stay tuned. This reunion's far from over. President Trump's NATO policy proposal, potential 2025 term, as 2025 kicks off with Trump back in the Oval Office. Fresh off his 2024 election win, the NATO family reunion's about to get a serious shakeup. During the campaign, he didn't mince words. Same old Trump, megaphone in hand, preaching his gospel of pay up or tough luck. He doubled down on his first-term mantra. If NATO cousins don't hit that magic 2% GDP defense spending mark, don't expect Uncle Sam to ride in with the cavalry. I'm not your free bodyguard, he'd bellow, scolding a kid who forgot their chores. But this time he's not just grumbling. He's floating a wild new idea, tying U.S. military support to how much cash each country ponies up. Imagine a NATO where help comes with a price tag, like a loyalty rewards program gone rogue. You want tanks? Show me the receipts. It's a beefed-up version of his old fair share obsession, and it's got the family buzzing some nodding, some clutching their pearls, all wondering if this could crack the we're-all, in this together vibe that's held NATO together since the Cold War. But wait, there's more drama brewing. Word around the campfire is Trump's eyeing a big move. Picture him squinting at a map of Europe, plotting to yank a chunk of U.S. troops out of Germany, where they've been chilling since forever, and maybe send them strutting over to Eastern Europe instead. Why? It's all about rewarding the good kids, the NATO countries that cough up the cash end, leaving the slackers to fend for themselves. Germany, with its fancy bases and not quite 2% spending, might get a CAU, while Poland or the Baltics, who've been flexing their checkbooks, could score some shiny new American boots on the ground. He's even tossing around the idea of military exercises, those big, loud war games, only with the countries that meet his spending bar. You want to play with the big toys? Pay the membership fee. It's less collective defense and more pay-to-play, turning NATO into a transactional game where loyalty's measured in dollars, not handshakes. The cousins in Western Europe are side-eyeing each other, wondering if the family's splitting into cliques. Then comes the curveball, a whisper from one of Trump's inner circle. Buddies about a hibernating NATO. Yep, you heard that right. Imagine NATO as a bear, curling up for a long nap, with the U.S. stepping back from its starring role as the family's fearless leader. In this setup, America wouldn't be the one rallying the troops or hosting the barbecue. It'd be the last resort guy, popping in only if things get really hairy. You handle the small stuff. Europe, Trump might say, kicking back with a Diet Coke, while the cousins scramble to figure out who's grilling the burgers now. It's a total vibe shift from the U.S., as the glue holding NATO together to a distant uncle who only shows up when the house is on fire. The idea's got some allies nervous. How fast can NATO wake up from a snooze if Russia starts rattling sabers? Others see it as Trump's way of saying, I'm still here, but you're on deck. And then there's Project 2025, the brainchild of some of Trump's policy wonks, aiming to flip the script on America's whole government gaming. This isn't just tweaking the family recipe, it's tossing the cookbook out the window. The plan transformed NATO by handing the reins to Europe for keeping Russia in check, while the U.S. pulls back its troops and its heart from the continent. Picture American bases packing up. G is waving goodbye, and the U.S. saying, we'll keep the nukes ready, but you're the front line now, champs. It's a vision where America's less the big brother and more the aloof cousin who sends a postcard from across the ocean. The pitch is all about deterrence through nuclear swagger, not boots on the ground, leaving Europe to sweat the day-to-day details. Some NATO folks cheer the idea of stepping up, others freak out, wondering if they're ready to run the show without Uncle Sam's deep pockets and loud voice. So, here's the 2025 scene. Trump's back, and he's got NATO in his crosshairs, ready to remix the family dynamic. He's pushing his pay-or-pray policy, shuffling troops like chess pieces, flirting with a sleepy alliance, and nodding at a grand plan to slim down America's role. It's a high-stakes poker game. Will the cousins ante up and keep the gang tight, or will Trump's move split the table? The barbecue's sizzling, but the guest list's up in the air. One thing's for sure, this reunion's about to get loud, messy, and oh so interesting. Will NATO adapt to Trump's tune, or will someone flip the grill in protest? Grab a snack. This saga's heating up fast. Potential impact on U.S.-NATO relations by 2025. With Trump back at the helm and his NATO playbook in full swing, the family reunion's teetering on the edge of a blockbuster showdown. His big ideas tying U.S. support to spending quotas, shuffling troops, and flirting with a hibernating alliance aren't just shaking the picnic table. They're threatening to flip it over entirely. The biggest worry? That sacred family vow, Article 5, the one for all for one promise that's kept everyone cozy since 1949. Trump's pay-up or good luck. Rhetoric is like a crack in the foundation. Suddenly, the cousins aren't so sure Uncle Sam's got their back. What if Russia crashes the party? The Eastern European crew whispers, eyeing their border fences. Will he show up, or will he be too busy counting our receipts? It's a trust issue, plain and simple, and it's got the whole gang second-guessing whether this alliance is still ride dash or dash die dot, the vibe across the Atlantic's getting prickly too. Trump's obsession with fair shares isn't just about defense, bucksets spilling into trade spats and policy squabbles. Picture him at the reunion, griping, "Why am I buying all the burgers while you're just bringing napkins?" Meanwhile, Europe's muttering about America's "my first" attitude. Then there's the big elephants in the room, Russia and China. Trump's got his own playbook for dealing with those troublemakers, and it doesn't always match the cousin's game plan. Say he wants to cozy up to Moscow while Europe's busy building walls. Suddenly, the family's not just bickering over the bill. They're arguing about who the real enemy is. It's like someone switched the playlist from Kumbaya to Sweet Caroline. Everyone's singing, but no one's on the same verse. But here's the twist. Trump's wildcard moves might just light a fire under Europe's backside. With Uncle Sam waffling, the cousins are starting to think, maybe we don't need him to run the show. The uncertainties, like a wake-up call time to bulk up, step up, and maybe even host their own barbecue. You can already hear the gears turning. Germany's polishing its tanks. France is flexing its fancy jets, and the whole crew's tossing more cash into the defense pot. There's even chatter about a long-game plan. Could Europe take over NATO's driver's seat if the US keeps drifting? It's a slow burn. Sure, building their own war machine takes time, and the bills aren't cheap, but Trump's figure it out. Attitude might accidentally spark a new era of European swagger. Fine, Don, they grumble. We'll grill our own burgers. Still, it's not all rosy. If Trump keeps pushing this pay-to-play vibe, the family could splinter. The rich cousins like Germany or France might grit their teeth and pay up, while the smaller, fry like Latvia or Bulgaria could get left in the cold, vulnerable and pouty. Russia's watching from the sidelines, rubbing its hands, thinking, ooh, a divided BBQ. More snacks for me. And if the US really dials back like that Project 2025 idea of pulling troops and playing nuclear babysitter from afar, NATO's quick response muscle could atrophy. Imagine a bully kicking sand at the little cousins, and the big guns are stuck across the ocean twiddling their thumbs. It's not a total collapse, but it's a wobbly, tightrope walkless, unbreakable alliance. More awkward family group chat. So, here's the 2025 snapshot. Trump's policies are like a rogue wind blowing through the reunion. On one hand, they're fraying the old bonds. Article 5s looking shaky. Tensions are simmering, and the cousins are eyeing the exits. On the other, they're forcing Europe to grow a backbone, maybe even rewrite the family rules. Will NATO emerge tougher, leaner, and more European-led, like a globe after a messy breakup? Or will Trump's transactional tango leave it a fractured mess, with half the gang sulking and the other half scrambling? The barbecue's still going, but the smoke's thick and the chatter's loud. One thing's clear. This family's at a crossroads, and the next move Trump's or Europe's could decide if they're toasting marshmallows together or calling it quits. Pass the ketchup, this one's gonna be a doozy. Analysis and expert opinion. So, there we were, in the middle of this NATO soap opera, with the world's smartest folks scratching their heads and sipping espressos like it was an Olympic sport. The rumor mill was churning harder than a blender. At a smoothie convention, all because Trump, our golden-haired wildcard, was looming on the horizon like a storm cloud with a Twitter account. The gloom and doom squad was out in full force, pacing around with their clipboards and furrowed brows. Listen, they'd say, leaning over conference tables littered with stale donuts. If Trump gets back in the driver's seat, NATO's toast, done kaput. They painted a picture so grim it could have starred in a horror flick. America slinking away from the alliance like a kid ditching a group project, leaving Europe holding the bag or worse, the bill. The experts fretted that the US would lose its swagger on the global stage, like a rock star forgetting the lyrics mid-concert, and Trump. Oh, they were convinced he saw NATO as some kind of mob gig. Nice little alliance you got here. Shame. If something happened to it, unless you cough up more cash, and that he'd have the whole transatlantic crew scattering like pigeons when a car honks, but hold the phone across the room. A few cooler heads were sipping herbal tea and refusing to panic. "Guys, chill," they'd say, kicking back. In their chairs, sure, Trump's loud enough to wake a coma patient, but maybe that's not all bad. They had this wild theory that his barking could actually light a fire under NATO's behind. Picture it. Europe's leaders, tired of Trump's pay-up or pack-up routine, digging into their dusty piggy banks and tossing in extra coins. Suddenly, NATO's got a new haircut, a gym membership, and a swagger of its own, like a globe montage in a teen movie. Some even whispered that Trump's chaos could force a remix of the transatlantic playlist, with Europe stepping up as the lead singer, while America chills in the back with the nuclear drum solo. And here's the kicker. A couple of these optimists pointed to Ukraine, where Trump's "you're on your own, kid" vibe was accidentally turning Europe into a defense nerd overnight. See, they'd grin. He's the grumpy coach we didn't know we needed. Meanwhile, the real brainiacs, the ones with glasses and pocket protectors, were scribbling plans like they were prepping for the world's nerdiest heist. "Europe," they'd say, waving markers at whiteboards, "if America's gonna nap on the job, we've got this." They dreamed up a chore chart straight out of a roommate meeting. Europe takes the front lines polishing tanks and manning the watchtowers, while Uncle Sam lounges in the back with the big red button. Floated the idea of a Trump-proof NATO, which sounded like it could be a snazzy new app or maybe a bunker with Wi-Fi. They tossed around buzzwords like burden sharing and self-reliance, which made everyone nod sagely, while secretly wondering if they'd get a cool code name out of it. The vibe was half strategy session, half sitcom, with Europe eyeing the future like a teenager plotting to move out of their parents' basement. And so, the plot thickened. Would NATO crumble under Trump's glare like a soggy cracker, or would it rise from the ashes like a phoenix with a better budget? The experts kept arguing, the coffee kept brewing, and the world kept watching popcorn in hand-waiting to see if this alliance could dodge the wrecking ball or turn it into a dance party. Other U.S. and NATO foreign policy priorities, now while the NATO crew was busy debating whether Trump was their grumpy savior or the guy who'd accidentally burned the clubhouse down. The bigger world kept spinning, and boy, did it have its own drama. Over in the U.S., Trump's foreign policy playbook was still stamped with his favorite slogan, "America First." It was like he'd turned international relations into a giant garage sale. Write things up for negotiation, and he's haggling like he's after a discount lawnmower. Top of his to-do list. Keeping an eagle eye on China, picture him squinting across the Pacific, slapping tariffs on their stuff like a kid putting "no girls allowed" signs on his treehouse. Trade wars, tech tussles, and a bit of chest puffing, it was all part of the game, and Trump wasn't about to let anyone forget who he thought should be the big dog in the yard. Then there was Ukraine and Russia, the messy neighbors he couldn't stop poking at. He'd grumble about the war over there, like it was a soap opera he didn't sign up for, and his hot and cold fling with Russia kept everyone guessing whether he'd send flowers or a sternly worded note. Meanwhile, NATO had its own laundry list of worries, and it wasn't just about dodging Trump's side eye. They were laser-focused on keeping Russia from acting like the neighborhood bully, rattling its saber and eyeing Ukraine like a tasty snack. The alliance was all in on backing Ukraine. Think of it like slipping them extra ammo in a dodgeball game. But that wasn't all. NATO was also starting to sneak peeks at China, squinting at this new kid on the block who'd gotten tall and loud fast. They'd mutter. "This guy's stirring up trouble for our Euro-Atlantic vibe." On top of that, they were juggling a whole circus of modern headache cyber attacks popping up like digital whack-a-moles, warfare tricks, and even climate change crashing the party with its melting ice and sweaty summers. It was a lot, and the gang was scrambling to keep up, like parents trying to wrangle toddlers with too many toys. Word on the street was that the big NATO family summit was coming up in 2025 at The Hague. Everyone was buzzing about it like it was the season finale of their favorite show. Will they sort out Russia, China, the Wi-Fi crashing mid-meeting? The bets were on. Some figured it'd be a chance to iron out these priorities, maybe even sketch a game plan for dodging Trump's curveballs. Others just hoped they'd get through it without someone spilling coffee on the treaty papers. Either way, the U.S. and NATO were like two cousins at a picnic, Trump's crew yelling about their own picnic basket, while NATO tried to keep the ants and bigger pests from ruining the spread. So the stage was set, the players were in motion, and the world was still munching popcorn, wondering if this transatlantic tango would end in a high five or a faceplant. Only to Mond, maybe a few tweets would tell, views of NATO member states. As the NATO family reunion loomed closer, the cousins across the pond, those fancy Europeans, started getting antsy about Trump, potentially crashing the party again. Picture them huddled in their cozy castles and modern parliaments, sipping tea or espresso and whispering, "Oh no, what if Uncle Sam's loud nephew shows up and knocks over the punch bowl?" Trump's old rants about NATO being a freeloaders club still echoed in their ears, and they couldn't shake the jitters about whether America would stick around to guard the backyard. The vibe was less rah-rah teamwork and more should we start locking the doors ourselves. But these Europeans weren't just sitting around wringing their hands. Nope, they rolled up their sleeves and opened their wallets big time. NATO's head honcho, Mark Rutte, popped up like a proud dad at a bake sale, announcing, "Guess what, folks? My Euro kids just pledged a cool $800 billion for defense." Germany, not to be outdone, was like, "Hold my beer, I mean. My bratwurst we might toss in another $500 billion. The UK and France chimed in too, promising to beef up their piggy banks. It was like a continent-wide shopping spree, but instead of new shoes, they were buying tanks and shiny missiles. All this because Trump's pay-up or "I'm outta here" grumbling had them. Spooked-hand, maybe a little motivated, then the big shots UK, France, and Germany started dreaming bigger. They huddled over croissants and maps, plotting a takeover of the family business. "Okay," they said, "if America's gonna nap on the couch for the next 5 to 10 years, we'll run the show." Germany's new boss, Friedrich Merz, even floated a wild idea. What if we build a shiny new Euro defense club from scratch? Forget NATO, let's start fresh. Over in France, Emmanuel Macron was nodding like a wise owl, muttering, we need to stand on our own to feet in hand, maybe rope in Canada, because they're nice and bring good maple syrup. It was like the cool kids planning a secret clubhouse, but with more fighter jets. Not everyone was on the same page, though shocker, right? Some NATO cousins shrugged off Trump's barking as just his usual negotiation dance. Like when your uncle haggles over a used car. The Eastern European gang, those folks, eyeballing Russia like it's a bear at their picnic, were actually kind of pumped. More cash, more troops. Bring it on, they cheered, happy to see NATO flexing its muscles. But then there was Hungary's Viktor cozying up to Moscow like they were swapping borscht recipes, while Poland's Andrzej Duda was over. Here, waving a flag and shouting, 3% of GDP for defense. Minimum, people, let's make it a rule. It was a family squabble for the ages. Half the table wanted to build a fortress. The other half wasn't sure if they should laugh or cry at Trump's latest tweet. So, the NATO crew was a mixed bag, some prepping for a solo adventure, others hoping Trump was just bluffing, and a few crossing their fingers for more firepower. The Hague summit was starting to feel like the ultimate showdown, and everyone was wondering, would they hug it out or start drawing new battle lines? Potential changes in NATO structure and goals. As the NATO family squabbled and schemed, Trump's voice kept booming in the background like a foghorn at a quiet picnic. Pay your share, or you're on your own, folks, and wouldn't you? No, that nagging actually started shaking things up in the alliance's dusty old rulebook. The brain trust, those folks with fancy titles and even fancier spreadsheets, began muttering about a big remodel. What if, they whispered over their lukewarm coffee, we turn NATO into one of those tiered VIP clubs, like where the big spenders get the velvet rope treatment and the penny pinchers are stuck with the cheap seats. Picture a two-tier NATO. The countries tossing in extra cash get the full U.S. security blanket. Think armored hugs and missile-shaped gift baskets, while the ones still counting their coins might just get a polite nod and a good luck. Out there, from Uncle Sam, it was less all for one for all, and more you get what you pay for. Like a buffet where the prime ribs only for the high rollers. But the makeover wasn't just about who paid the bills, it was also about where NATO aimed its binoculars. With China flexing its muscles across the globe like a bodybuilder showing off at the beach, the alliance started squinting eastward. Hey, they said, maybe it's not just about Russia anymore. Maybe we need to keep an eye on this new guy strutting around the Pacific. The bigwigs figured NATO might pivot a bit, tweaking its game plan to tackle China's rise-think trade tussles, tech wars, and all that jazz. Meanwhile, Russia was still the grumpy neighbor they couldn't ignore, especially with Ukraine as the messy backyard brawl. But Trump's nudging or shoving might tweak. How they handled that, to maybe less charge in with pitchforks, and more, let's see who blinks first. On top of all that, NATO was juggling a whole circus of new headaches, cyber sneak attacks, weird hybrid war games, and whatever else the world threw their way. Trump's do-it-my-way energy was like a wild card tossed into the mix, speeding up some changes and throwing others off track. The alliance was starting to feel like a middle-aged guy hitting the gym still, figuring out the treadmill, but determined to keep up with the cool kids. Would this new, tiered China watching NATO stick the landing, or would it trip over its own shoelaces? The Hague summit was shaping up to be the big reveal, and the family was buzzing with bets on whether they'd come out leaner, meaner, or just plain confused. Conclusion and outlook. So, picture this. Donald Trump's back in the White House for round 2. And everyone's buzzing about what's going to happen to America's old pal, NATO. You see, Trump's never been shy about throwing shade at the alliance. He's called it outdated, a money pit, and probably a few other colorful things when the cameras weren't rolling. Now that he's got the keys to the Oval Office again, folks are betting on some big changes. Maybe he'll slap conditions on America's help, like you want troops. Show me the cash first. Or perhaps he'll yank the U.S. military out of Europe faster than you can say cheeseburger. There's even whispers of a hibernating NATO, whatever that means. It sounds like the alliance might just take a long nap. Over in Europe, the allies are sweating bullets. They're thinking, oh great, Trump's at it again, time to beef up our own defenses before he leaves us hanging. Some are even tossing around wild ideas about going solo, like a teenager moving out of their parents' house for the first time. It's all a bit dramatic, but you can't blame them. Trump's unpredictability is keeping everyone on their toes. Fast forward to 2025, and the future of this US-NATO bromance is anyone's guess. Experts are placing their bets, like it's a Vegas casino night. Some gloom and doom types reckon NATO's toast on kaput, finito collapsing under Trump's "I'm not paying for this" vibe. Others, the glass-half-full crew, think Trump's tough love might actually whip NATO into shape. Imagine it. Europe digs deeper into their wallets, the alliance gets a financial glow-up, and suddenly NATO's strutting around stronger than ever. Funny how a little pressure can turn a sleepy club into a lean, mean defense machine, or at least that's the hope. The NATO gang's already scrambling. Member countries are boosting their defense budgets and whispering to each other, okay, if America's stepping back, who's driving this bus? It's like a group project where the leader suddenly bails and everyone's left figuring out how to split the work. How they handle this and whether they can keep the team spirit alive will decide if NATO's still got game. Of course, it's not just about Trump and his big ideas. There's a whole deck of wild cards in play. Over in Ukraine, the war's still rumbling along, and NATO's got to figure out how to deal with that mess. Then there's China, everyone's favorite geopolitical riddle poking at the edges of the alliance's radar. Plus, new threats keep popping up like whack-a-moles, cyber attacks, climate chaos, you name it. NATO's got to adapt or risk looking like that one friend who still uses a flip phone in 2025. In the end, it's all about whether these countries can stick together when the going gets tough. Trump might be shaking things up like a human tornado, but NATO's fate rests on its members' ability to roll with the punches and keep their promise to have each other's backs. Will they pull it off, or will the whole thing turn into a geopolitical soap opera? Grab some popcorn, we're about to find out the future of transatlantic relations. A complicated history, and an even more uncertain road ahead. We've explored some of the key players, the potential conflicts, and the language that will define this crucial relationship. But now, it's your turn. What do you think is the biggest challenge facing NATO in the years to come? What role do you see language playing in international diplomacy? Let's get the conversation started in the comments section. And don't forget to show your support. Like this video if you enjoyed it, share it with anyone who's interested in global affairs, and subscribe to Story Driven English for more in-depth analysis and language learning. We'll see you in the next video.